there.
Okay, just a summary. What are we going to discuss today? I'm going to make a brief recap of the previous presentation, and then I will go into the core of my research, which is about thinking visually. What does it mean to think visually? And then what our brain sees actually, according to the research of Rudolf Arnheim. He was a German historian, art historian, and psychologist of the arts. And after that, I will touch into the issue of the Buddha's voice, which is something which Nichiren was very keen of representing the Buddha's voice. And I will explain how, in my view, he solved this issue, which was very dear to him. Then I will show a few typologies of mandalas, which he inscribed. And as you know, there are actually roughly 140 extant to this day. And it is very rare that two are identical. Some of them are similar, but not identical. So we will see an evolution in Nichiren's mandalic expression, if you allow me the term. Then I will touch into the concept of the kokue, the assembly in the air, which is the core teaching or the core allegory in the Lotus Sutra, and the concept of the eternal return, which is something developed by the historian Marcel Iliade. And then I will touch also on the concept of personal and collective performance, and then an interesting view of lasting traces of Nietzsche's actions and the history reflected through the mandala. And then I will finish this presentation with a few words about transmission and identity. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we discussed on the previous presentation, I started with from very from very far from the caves, from the Paleolithic, Neo-Paleolithic times, and the relationship between image and sign as the proto scripture. Then I touch into the imagery of the Buddha, because many of you may know that the Buddha at the beginning was not depicted but alluded, and then after a certain period, the from the matura plasticity of the Buddha's image, we can see a strong Greek and Mediterranean and Persian influence, which is something that I touched last time, that Buddhism is not something Asian or Japanese, but is basically a choral work from many thinkers from the Mediterranean, and I underline Mediterranean, and to the east of Tang, China, so speak Japan, and how symbolism developed, such as the Yaksha and the Yakshi as a spirit of nature in cosmopolitan India, and that there were actually pillars at the Sanchi Stupa with depicting Greek warriors, and on in many cases they are the name of Greek donors. So we should not forget about really how cosmopolitan Buddhism really is. And then I touch into the art of the Kamakura period, which we are thought to be the Mappo era to be a gloomy period, but actually in the arts it was a very flourishing moment and a very creative moment. Then I explain briefly about Kukai, the great teacher Kobo, and mandalas, and also I touch on the contribution of Honen, which lived a century before Nichiren, which he of course criticizes in his writings, but actually from a certain point of view, if there were no Honen, there could have been Nichiren, and they had much in common. Then I tried to discuss with you what may have inspired Nichiren visually. We know more or less what he read because we know his study curricula, but we have no proof to determine what he actually saw. But there were a few sources of inspiration. Jacqueline Stone mentioned that Professor Nakao had an idea that perhaps one of the inspirations for him were the illustrated frontispieces of the sutra depicting the assembly of the air, and then he wanted to, to draw a similar concept. And then we closed the first session with the first mandala inscribed by Nichiren, which is basically the Daimoku with Fudo and Aizen flanking it, and about the legends. I mean, his permanence on Sado between truth, facts, and legends. Next slide, please. So the core of the research is based on the concept of thinking visually. Because every visual experience has an effect on the nerve system. This is the research of Rudolf Arnheim. He said, he wrote that everything that we see, such as position, depth, size, shape, and direction and form, is read by our brain in a certain way. So we respond to to the things that are on the left or on the right in a very different way. And also to the shape. The most important aspect that touches our hearts or our minds is, for example, is symmetry. When we like a person, the first thing that we look are the eyes and the face, and of course, we look at symmetry and harmony, and this is much more. For example, an exegete, somebody who studied religion in the sense of in the doctrinal sense, he has a different reading than an art historian who reads the picture, what is on the left and what is on the right, what are the spaces in between. This is a science that is very precise. And the Nichiren Mandala, also quoting Professor Nagao, for example, as we saw last time, Shinran did also inscribe a few mandalas, but they were different from the ones that Nichiren produced, in a sense, because uh, Nichiren was a performance. Nobody else touched his mandala. In the case of Shinran, for example, he inscribed Namo Amida Buso at the center, but then somebody else pasted some quotations from the Sutra of Infinite Life, and then he put some other phrases, and somebody painted the lotus dice at the bottom. So it was not. It was, yes, in a way a calligraphic mandala, but it was on the performative side something, in the emotional side something completely different from the Nichiren mandala. And now we go to the next slides, please. So what you see here is the core of my research. And this is the reason why the Nichiren mandala attracts the viewer, even if she or he cannot read the characters. Basically, you see here that I draw many parallel lines, many chiaroscuro is the Italian terms also used in hard history. So many fields which give it a plasticity, a pattern. And Rudolf Arnheim writes that the shapes, certain shapes have a predetermined, innate emotional response in our brains, or in our hearts, in our mind, whatever you want to see it. For example, I don't know if you can see the mouse. You have certainly noticed that the shape, the central shape of Namyo Renge-kyo on the mandala has a shape that somehow is reminding of an obelisk. And the obelisk is a known archetype or shape that lifts your mind up. So as we can see in Nichiren's mandalic production, we see the progressions of his art, so to speak. So we can fairly say, even if he did not put this on writing, that this was a conscious action from his side. So we can, as we will see later, his first mandalas were very disharmonic in a way. This, of course, has to do with the fact that he had just returned from an exile, and therefore he was certainly not feeling well, and also his permanence at Binobo. At the beginning, he needed to adjust, but as he gradually begins to feel better and he experiments more, every next mandala becomes more harmonious and symmetric and beautiful to see. So my professor Terao Ichi also told me that when I came up with this idea, which he liked very much, he reminded me that, of course, the shape and the symmetry and the harmony are very important, visually very important, but it is also important what it is inscribed on the mandala. Otherwise, we could just, let's say, chant in front of this Kandinsky looking like modern painting, similar to modern painting, which you see in the middle, but it has no context. It has no content. So there must be a symbiosis between the content, so the religious content, what is inscribed on the mandala, and the individual context. But my research is based basically on the visual impact that Nichiren consciously tried to imbue in his mandalas. And now we go to the next slide, please. So here I will speak about the Buddha's voice. We know the Buddha's voice is one of the 32 characteristic of the Tathagata. It's called Bonnonjo in Japanese, the pure and far-reaching voice. And Nichiren wrote also in a letter that is still extant. If an image painted or sculpted of the Buddha lacks of this characteristic, it is not equal to the Buddha because it lacks the voice. One suggestion would be that you, as Tiantai, suggested that you place the words of the Buddha, so the sutra, which are the words of the Buddha, at the base of the mandala. But there is another reading. You can see all this. You have certainly noticed. I try to end. No, I cannot possible. You have certainly noticed that the Daimoku has many parallel protruding lines. These are called in vernacular language are called the mustache of the daimoku, but the technical term, so to speak, is komyo ten, so rays of light. And when I discussed with Mr. Kataoka Kunio, who was a disciple of Kihachi Yamanaka, the researcher who produced for us, for everybody, the Gohonzon collection known as the Gohonzon Shu. He was a man who studied the Nichiren Mandala intensively for over 70 years. And Kataoka recollected Yamanaka saying once that those lines should be called komyo sen, so sen as in line and not ten as in point of ray, so to speak, because he was convinced that those lines, those protruding lines, are the graphicization of the Buddha's voice, of the vibrating of the pure and far-reaching voice. In fact, everyone who has done a little bit with the arts knows exactly that there is nothing decorative in the arts. Everything which is placed in a painting, in a work of art, is there for a specific reason. And we discussed this about also last time. So what are these komios? And according to Yamanaka's interpretation, which I trust very deeply, uh, is that he wanted to give a graphic form to the vibrations of the Buddha's voice. But not only, as you can see in this mandala, which is from 1279, which he donated, inscribed for his disciple Iobonicho, the son of Tokijonin, you can see that there is the classic mandala structure with all the bodhisattvas and attendants, etc., etc. But also you see some diagonally inserted characters which are more dynamic, which are evidently placed, how can I say, outside the main transformation panel. And what are these inscriptions? These are actually quotations from the sutra or from the scripture. Uh, One reading is that this is a personal message of Nichiren to the recipient or to the Sangha who was receiving this mandala. But not only, we can also say that those quotations from the sutra or from the scriptures are the echo of Shakyamuni's preaching at the assembly in the air. Why we can say this? Because those inscriptions are evidently not part of the mandala panel, because they are fluctuating around as if we could give a shape to the voice. They would fluctuate in the space around the assembly of the air. So uh, in this uh, passages which he quotes in not only in this but in many other example, Nietzsche often quotes the eight character line Furo Fushi, so which is many of you known as will not know sickness and death, and will not grow old. And of course, this is a phrase of encouragement to probably somebody who was sick or fighting with sickness. But to quote again another lecture of Professor Nagao, he said something very interesting, is that the human beings dwell into the four sufferings, while the Buddha does not die and does not grow old. What does it mean? Is it just a Buddha? No, is it basically our enlightened nature? So without the personality, which most probably dies along with our mortal remains, so to speak, because as you know, Buddhism doesn't believe in a soul in the Christian sense, but something remains. And so what does remains, what does not grow old and what does not die, is actually our Buddha nature. So this is basically the transformation panel, which you see on the other side in the circle. Uh, this is the same scene depicted on the mandala with Shakyamuni and Tao seated inside. You can see the Sanskrit glyphs placed inside the treasure tower. And another important thing is that Shakyamuni, which we know being on the right side, is actually placed on the left. Why this is? Because Shakyamuni and Tao are facing the audience. So the recipient of the mandala, which is often inscribed on the panel, is also projected into the ceremony of the air. So the observer takes part and faces Shakyamuni and Tao, which are expounding the Lotus Sutra, and the vibration of his voice is fluctuating in the panel. Of course, with paper and brush, this is, in my view, having studied art for a long time, this is the perfect way to depict this. And there is, for example, also another parallel which you can find in my book about this research, and which is also which I also place in my master thesis, in the European Gothic, there are some panels at Bingen in Germany in the late Gothic that depict, I think, 8 panels depicting the narrative of the Christian narrative of the Annunciation and the birth of Maria and all this typical biblical narrative. And in those depictions are angels which carry a sort of a banner with some inscriptions inside. So those banners are, of course, clearly separated from the scene, from the panel, from the transformation panel. In a way, they speak to us. So this is a not a new invention, but we find this expedient, how to say, to have the artwork speak to the observer in a certain way. We find it also as far as Europe. So in this way, I theorize, I affirm, I say that Nichiren solved the issue of the Buddha's voice. In my university as a bachelor, I studied scenography, so scene technology, and of course, if you have a you are in a theater, you have to solve, so to speak, many issues. If you, for example, are putting into scene the Flying Dutchman, where an enormous ship arrives flying, of course you cannot have a ship that comes onto the into the theater. So you have to solve the problems with experience in a certain way. So the whole theatrical narrative is full of this solving the problem, and this is exactly what Nichiren did. In a way, this is a way to not to say that Nichiren was an artist, because I never want to affirm this, but Nichiren definitely was a visual person. We know that from the many surviving graphics of the 5 periods of Shakyamuni's propagation, and we have also many other charts, even about Chinese astrology, or from the imperial dynasty in China, in Japan. He puts it always in graphic. These were probably a primordial version of a PowerPoint, so to speak, that he used during his lectures at Minobo. So he was definitely a visual person, and we can see that there are many conscious actions in his mandala. And in the next slide, please, we will see various typologies of man. Oh, sorry. We will see the evolution in his expression on the small mandalas which you see at the top are mandalas inscribed probably immediately after Sado, maybe on Sado or immediately after Sado. You can see that the whole panel is a little bit disharmonious. He tried to put in some symmetry in a way, but the inscription are aligned on the top, for example, but not at the bottom. But then you see in the 3 others example on the second row, it becomes much more better, much more structurized. And if you see the first mandala on the left, in the second row, this is the mandala, a very special mandala, which it is said that Nichiren gave to his disciple Hoki Boniko, because we know that because it was stored at Taizikiji at the beginning. And in this mandala, he places a very particular laudatory inscription, which is not found on any other mandala. At the bottom, you see this inscription, which basically encircles in a way his cipher signature at bottom left, in which he don't use his usual standards inscription. This mandala has never appeared in 2200 years after the Buddha's passing, etc. But he wrote, he inscribed This mandala has never been inscribed before, and in the three countries of India, of UAE, China, and Japan, and the compassionate father Jogyo inscribes this and propagates this for the world. So he, in from one point of view, he identifies himself most probably already with the emissary or with Bodhisattva Visishtakaritra Jogyo himself. But the interesting thing is that he uses for when he writes about the three counties, he does not. It is usually translated with India, Japan, and China. But the characters for India are actually, which is Tinjiko, is actually different. He used the character for Geshi, which is the ancient Kushan Empire of the UAZ, where actually the Lotus Sutra was compiled by Kumarajiva in the canonic form that we know now. So this mandala already tells us that Nichiren was very aware that the Lotus Sutra has been compiled in the form that he revered in the UAZ empire, which is more or less we discussed about last time, where now Afghanistan and the Kashmir is, and where much of the Buddhist art and the sutta had flourished. So we see that Nichiren draws many mandala, and none of them is equal to the others. We see also on the third row on the left the famous prayer honzon, the Kito honzon, which is a 8-sheet larger mandala which Nichiren gave to his disciple Nisho, which was older than him and survived him for a few decades. And also here he placed many of these sutra inscriptions. On the other side, we also see many quotations from the sutra. We also see that at the bottom left in the fourth row, this is a mandala that he gave to his disciple Nichimoku, which was one of the children which were sent in early boyhood to Minobu to learn directly from him. And this mandala has a very particular issue, which we will see later. It is mostly known that because Fudo and the position of Fudo and Aizen are reversed, we have no idea that if Nichiren made a mistake or if he did it consciously, and if so, why he did this. But definitely, the whole scene is what in the theatrical jargon is called a tableau vivant. So a tableau, which a tableau maybe from the forensic, for all this TV shows, police TV shows, and you see a lot of people talk about tableaus, which is basically placing on a piece of paper who was where during the crime scene, but this is the tableau. But in the theatrical interpretation, the tableau vivant is a living tableau, which is basically the stage of a theater, which with many players, with many actors and actresses placed there. And of course they are not stiff, they're not mannequins, but they are alive, and so they move. So Nichiren tried to give it a sort of a living transformation panel, so to speak. And then you see in the two figures here on the right, in the middle, I draw this obelisk, which is this is a mandala from already a mature period. This is the mandala which Nichiren inscribed to his disciple Jakunichibo, with also some dedications from his teacher Hokibo Nikko, which, as you can see, is almost a perfect obelisk, which is very harmonious. And then on the extreme right side, on the same mandala, you can see how I made all the calculation of each mandala. because with H. Terao, he told me you have to determine what he called a 0 point. And then I thought, oh, that's easy. You just made two diagonal points, and where they cross is diagonal points. He said, no, because this is not the original paper. The mandalas were framed and reframed many times. The edges were cut, so you don't know where the 0 point actually is. So you have to think about. So what I thought is that Nichiren, of course, starts inscribing the mandala with the central inscription. So the upper character Na of Nam from Namu, it starts with a cross in a certain way. He starts with an horizontal stroke and then a vertical stroke. And where those two strokes meet, this exact point, I have determined my 0 point. From there, you trace a diagonal and then other crossing lines. And so I was able to determine all the angles, 30 degrees, 60 degrees, etc., of all those comio lines, to determine how they were actually, not only to the eye, most of them are almost perfectly parallel. And we have to remind that Nichiren did not draft the mandala. He did not make a draft like every famous and revered painter, from Michelangelo to Leonardo da Vinci. Everybody, they did a lot of drafts. They drafted, they make preparatory designs. Some of Michelangelo still survive to this day, but there are no preparatory designs for the mandala of Nichiren. Nevertheless, they have this almost perfect harmony in their shape, in his expression. So we can see that actually when he wrote, I inscribed my life in Sumi ink, whether this writing exists in his own hand or not, but it goes straight to the point, because calligraphy is something in Japan. We say that calligraphy does not lie, because there are no corrections. This is you draw something, you inscribe something with your brush, and this is what it is. If it doesn't look good, you maybe throw the paper away, but this is final. This moment is imprinted uh, in time forever, if you keep it. So the actions of your body, as we will see later, are actually on the mandala itself, even better than a picture, because a photograph captures the light, but calligraphy captures the body movement. So it is more than a picture. It is actually something that you can compare to a dynamic video. So then we will go to the next slide, please, where we see many typologies of mandalas. If you see the small one in the middle, this is a very beautiful small mandala, which is still extant at the Rishoan Kukai in Chiba. This was kept in the family for 11 generations until the 19th century. Later, then it was sold to the Murakami publishers, and then it was acquired through another route by the Risho Ankokukai. But we can see here how dearly not only the recipient kept this mandala through his whole life, but for a total of 11 generations. So for centuries, this mandala was kept into the family. Then you see at the above it, this is a 4-sheet mandala, one of the first early that Nietzsche inscribed for his disciple. This is the mandala of Nanjo Tokimitsu. And this is also kept in the outskirt of Tokyo. I mean, you can go by metro there in a way. So you can see it every year on November 3rd. There's a special pavilion built for it. And when you go in front of this mandala, uh, I can just tell you my sensations. Of course, you can feel that this is actually a living is actually a theatrical scene, as if somebody someone were drawing a storyboard of a theatrical narration. You have exactly this. You see this intention of Nichiren to produce something that was really captivating. And also on this mandala, as in many other, there are of course smudges and that are not corrected. You can see that his brush slipped, or some droplets of ink fell down on the paper. You can see this very clearly, but they were never corrected. Then you can see here in the middle this large mandala. This is what I dared to define an altarpiece, and Professor Terao did not get. I mean, he accepted this definition. This, think about, this is a mandala of 28 sheets, and it's measured now, after having framed probably many times, nearly 2.5 meter in length, and over 1 meter in width. So here also Nietzsche places many inscriptions and quotations. And as a matter of fact, if you can see the whole picture, you can see that at the end he here kind of ran out of space, so he had to place some other figure in a different position where he puts it usually. Uh, but this is not the only altarpiece, so to speak. We have many 6 or 10 or 18 sheets mandalas, which are still extant, which uh, I wrote a paper of the Reverend Hoyo Watanabe, who is actually I'm actually one of his proteges in a way. He took me in sympathy, so to speak. He always gives me some very good advice, although I'm not able to read his handwriting. He wrote that the early prayer halls, the Hokkaido of the affluent families like the Soya and the Tokis, were the places where Nichiren uh, were destined to these large mandalas. You see these other mandalas on the extreme right, which is undated, but we can guess from the calligraphies from the late 1274. He places here in the upper row, he places Mahavairochana, so the Buddha Dainichi from the Taizokai and the Kongokai, so from the Diamond Realm and from the Womb Realm. So actually what he later vehemently criticized, Lucia Dolce mentioned that probably Nichiren placed those two esoteric Buddhas to symbolize that all Buddhas are emanations of Shakyamuni and therefore are inferior to him. This is also one interesting reading. But another reading would be also that his esoteric roots were still very present at this time, when he already came back from Sado and was active in Minobu. And also, as we will see later, or no, you can see, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. If you see on the left, on the Fudo, you can see an horizontal squirm, or anyway, you can see that he inadvertently his brush slipped, and he placed some vertical sign which has no place, which has nothing to do with the inscription of Fudo. But this also, it was not cancelled. It is still there. So the whole performance, the whole body movement, his whole actions are still imprinted on the mandala originally as they were. And we will go to the next slide. Not very well done graph which I have done. You can see another innovation of Nichiren, which is the depiction of the assembly in the air. You can see on your upper left the mandala structure, which was usually in the esoteric mandala, like the Kongokai and the Taizokai and other mandala, is always the seen from the top. So the mandala seen from the top would be this rhomboid that you see on the upper left. But actually, the mandala honzon is like the structure that you see in the middle. And I would like to say that in aesthetics, in the science of aesthetic, there's a term is called deviation. It doesn't mean something negative. Deviation is when basically an artist or somebody who expresses himself visually deviates from the trends of the time, and from the periphery uh, arrives to the center. One deviation, for example, Gothic style is a deviation of the Romanesque. Renaissance style is a deviation of Gothic, and Baroque is a deviation from Mannerism, etc., etc. So Nichiren deviated skillfully, I may say, in that sense, in that he depicted the mandala not as a scene seen from the top, as it was customary until his time, but seen from the front, because in this way he can project the observer into the mandala. So you can see in this actual mandala of Nichiren, which you can see at the bottom of the left, as you can see also in many other mandalas, that the all the main six elements, which are the Daimoku, his signature, the four heavenly kings, and the two wisdom kings, Fudo and Aizen, they are not separated anymore. They are all connected. And as we will see later, uh, this is also an expression of encouragement, because this mandala and others in the same fashion stem from a very difficult period, because the Mongols were mounting up for the second attack after the first, which already had happened. And then the government was mounting pressure against the Nichiren Sangha, as many of you are familiar with the Asuhara affair. Jacqueline Stone wrote a very beautiful paper, which is titled The Asuhara Affair, which is very lucid and straightforward and competent. Uh, but you can see that the whole story evolves in the government, especially by the hands of the magistrate Taira Yoritsuna, uh, because he couldn't harm Nichiren, in Minobu, they started to go against his sangha. And this point is also very important, because in the period after Izu and before Sado, Nichiren, you can read it in his writing, he started to develop a very deep sense of gratitude with his sangha. So they actually were becoming one entity in a way, because Nichiren, as we know, started to read all the happenings in his life from the viewpoint of the living the text of the Lotus Sutra. And so he considered also his friends, his supporters, as envoys of Shakyamuni Buddha, which were assisting the votary of the Lotus Sutra, who was propagating the sutra amongst the persecution. And so this narrative has to be can be reflected also in the mandala, which is becomes more not only from a exegetical or from a doctrinal point of view important, but also from an emotional point of view, because Nietzsche embraces and wants to embrace and protect everyone, and he does so also this visually. And next slide, please. Uh, this beautiful image comes is from 19th century, famous 19th century book of Ogawa Taido, is Nichiren Daishi Shinjitsuden, so the true biography of Nichiren, although there's not much truthfulness in this. But the reason why I chose this image, this is the scene which is depicted when Nichiren inscribes the first Sado Shiken Daimandala, which unfortunately does exist today only in the form of copies and transcripts from later abbots of Kuonji. So we have actually no proof that it ever existed in Nichiren's hand, or it was something an icon created later. But this is, in a way, this is not really important, because the important thing is that uh, this image tells us, in a way, depicts what might have been the situation of Nichiren inscribing the mandala. We see that here he is not alone. He's not like the artist or the painter, or the um, priest who secludes himself in a dark room and produces his writings in solitude. No, this was a collect. Everybody who was present helped. Somebody had to, to held the paper straight. Somebody had to pass the brushes, and everybody who was present. We don't know how many people were present at each time, but we know that in a certain period at Minobu there were 40 to 60 people. There were even people which came claiming that they were friends or relatives of somebody else, and and he didn't have the heart of sending them back. So he said, okay, the more the merrier, if you pardon me this expression. So Nichiren was not alone, and they were holding performances. We have a writing on leveling the land, which he reports some engineering works at Minobu to Hagi Saninaga. And then he reports that they did this Ennen dance, the life prolonging dance. So I don't think there were any musicians playing music in a way, but there were definitely drums, because if you have to dance, you need at least a rhythm. So they definitely had some percussions and rhythmical movement. We cannot call it a dance in the modern way, but it was definitely a group of people moving rhythmically at some sort of sound. And then they had the annual Tantai lecture, which Nichiren kept holding his whole life. So although many will, probably be horrified if I dare to say that there are similarities with the concept of happening as in Alan Capro in the last century. So of course it has nothing to do with it, but definitely the point in common was that it was not a solitary performance, and perhaps on a day where there were performances, artistic performances in a way, and there were lectures, same as the definition of Alan Capro. So the similarities, of course, ends here, and I'm not daring to put the two things together. What I just wanted to say is that the inscriptions of the mandala was not something that Nichiren did alone in solitary confinement. So everybody who was present helped in one way or the other. Uh, and then we go to the next slide, please. And here I want to show you something which is very interesting in my view. You see on the upper left, this is the mandala which I've spoken before, given to his disciple Nichimoku. And you can see here at the left arm of Eisen, there is an evident uh, uh, mistake in a way that you see this is on the character for Daibadatta, where evidently Nichiren most probably with the sleeve of his robe on a fresh ink moved his arm towards the right, and then you see the trace of it. So this you see exactly, this is the movement of Nichiren's arm. and you can see this very, very clearly. On the left, upper left side, you can see these are very famous. These are the what are supposed. You see clearly some fingerprints. There is, of course, no forensic proof of any way that these are the fingerprints of Nichiren, but we can fairly guess that nobody else would touch the mandala when the ink was still fresh. So we can fairly say that these are Nichiren's fingerprints on the mandala. This is not the only case. It's probably one of the most famous and displayed case, because the others are more smaller and difficult to detect. But if you can see the enlarged pictures or original pictures, you can see that it's not full in a way of fingerprints, but this is not the only case, definitely. Then you can see something also very interesting on the lower left. You can see this comio line, which is divided in you can see it is divided actually in three. So you can see basically that Nichiren came down with his brush. He stopped for a microsecond, maybe to breathe, and then he continued. And then he lifted his brush once more to finish at the end. And this is a continuous line. So this all happened in a fraction of a moment, maybe, but is definitely there. And you can see that, and everybody can see that. Then you can see on the other right at the lower right side, this is the famous Rimetsu Doji Mandala, which is, I believe, this is very cherished. This is called also the Shute Mandala of Nichiren Shu. Is the large 10 sheets, I believe, mandala, which was given to Nichiro, most probably because he put his signature on the back, and it was enshrined at his deathbed. And you can see here the character Ren. Is the famous snake. Somebody called it the Yagi Honzon, so the snake Honzon, because you see this Komyo line, which uh, goes towards the right. And here also you can see he starts from the bottom. He make this circle around, and then he goes to the left, and then actually he stops his brush for a microsecond, and then he continues, stops kind of again, but doesn't lift his brush, and then he finishes. So all those mandalas and many others, each of them actually tells us many stories that we don't find in exegetical writings, but they are definitely there. And then we go to the next slide, please. We can see also that the mandalas are narrating history. Actually, I mean, the history that you read in the textbooks, and the history of the Nichiren Sangha. For example, on the left side, you see this small one-sheet mandala, which Nichiren gave to a lady named whose name was Kamehime. She came along with. There are three very almost identical mandalas given to believers named Kamehime, Kameya, and Kamewaka. They were the children of Chiba Yoritane. Chiba Yoritane is a historical person which is known, and in the books of history, which we know that he was somebody from the Chiba clan, which had fiefs in the southern Japan, or what became then awarded later. That we don't know. But definitely, what we know is that in the Bunmei no Yako, so in the first Mongol attack in 74, at the 11 months of 74, he fought in that battle. He did not die in the battle, but he passed away from the wounds the year after. And then his most probably children or relatives or direct relatives came to visit Nichiren 1 year after, in 1276, for the anniversary of their fathers or relative passing. So Nichiren inscribes each of them one small mandala. And another very interesting thing is that Nichiren places the recipient, in this case, he writes for the protection of Kamehime, inside of the oval of his cipher signature. We can say in a way that she is not only, how can I say, inside the tableau, but Nichiren is in a way embracing her, because in the other two mandalas you have exactly the same, that the recipient is inscribed inside of this. This is very rare. You don't have it on any other mandala. So you have a lot of history in the mandala. In the next one, also from 1276, this is a historical fact, not related directly to Nichiren, but this mandala is at the Omosu Seminary, so the Kitayama Homonji temple, and it is said, you can see that there's a square cut out and put some additional paper inside at the bottom through his signature. And it is said that it is because a bullet that was aimed at Tokugawa Ieyasu, uh, so the legend says, uh, hit the mandala and not him. So Tokugawa Ieyasu, it is known with almost certainty that he was, there was somebody were trying to kill him. Of course, he was a warrior, he was a powerful man, so it does not surprise. And that at that particular incident, he was hiding somewhere at the Omosu seminary, and this warrior was trying to kill him. He hit him and burned this piece of the mandala instead. Then what you see, the on the other mandala, you see a big difference between the mandalas of 1276 on those of 79. You see, as I said before, that all the six main figures are connected. But one most notable point is that Fudo and Aizen, which have the protective deities, which have been very thin and almost peripheral in a way, they become bold and larger, uh, connected with all the guardians, as to protect, to give a sense of protection. Why? Because people were experiencing anxiety. Warriors and many from the warrior class were among Nichiren's followers. They were sent to the south, to the Kyushu, to build the wall to counter the Mongol attack. This wall is remnants of this wall are actually still somewhere in the southern of Japan, and the government was persecuting Nichiren Sangha, as we said before, not only because of Nichiren's reading from in the light of the Lotus Sutra, but also, let's say, basically, if you rule a country at that time, you need law and order, you need social cohesion. You don't need a group of fanatics in their eyes. When you are saying that all shrines and temples should pray together for the victory of the country against the Mongols, and one group says, if you do those prayers, the country will go into the ruin and we will be defeated, you need to get to silence those people. Of course, they tried to harm Nichiren already, as we know from history. But he was a priest. It was not it was not a light thing to decapitate or to harm a priest. But of course, warriors in a battle, you are the magistrate. You basically can do whatever you want. As a matter of fact, we know also from the history of the Asoara affair, as Jacqueline Stone has wrote so well, that three peasants were actually decapitated. They were beheaded. So this was something that was very frightening. So Nichiren adjusts his mandalas to this situation. Those images of the wisdom kings and of the four heavenly kings are known in iconography, in the collective consciousness. People had seen statues everywhere of these wrathful deities with those big, with many teeth and eyes, and their hands and many weapons. So simply inscribing them, and the people knew what those symbols meant, they feel very protected. Then another historical, in a way, aspect related to the Nichiren Sangha through the centuries. Professor Nakao made a lecture which is on YouTube, unfortunately in Japanese, and there are no subtitles allowed, but they are on my channel, on my playlist. If you have seen a larger picture of this mandala, you know that you can see, for example, that his cipher signature and the bottom of the mandala is worn out. Uh, you may think maybe this is the decay of the time and the reframing, but Nakao explained very vividly, because he analyzed the pattern, so to speak, of this of the ink that was worn out, and he suggested that because this mandala was displayed many times or continuously through the centuries, so the believers participating in the airing ceremony, perhaps once a year or more times in a year, they normally move from the left to the right, and you can see the pattern of this warning out is that they probably touch the mandala at one point, and then they go down, and when they reach Nichiren's signature, they wanted to connect with Nichiren, so they touch his signature more intensely, and so in effect it is worn out in a particular shape, and then you see that this line of warning out ceases after Nichiren's signature. So there are many things that you can read in the mandala, if you want. And then we go to the last slide, please. Okay, here I want to introduce briefly the topic of the next and third class, that will be about Hokke identity, transmission of Hokke identity. Uh, we know, of course, that there has been in the past centuries harsh debate among different factions, so to speak, especially the Fuji factions against other factions, claiming that the other faction has misunderstood or betrayed Nichiren's message. But let me state very clearly, there were no traitors, there were no misunderstanding. Everybody brought their own understanding, having spent many years with Nietzsche, having fought with him, having eaten and drunk and danced and prayed with him for decades. Uh, we see here three mandalas which are very different in a way, but they are also very similar. They have the major point in common is that the central inscription, the Daimoku, the Dharma, is always at the center. So we know that the words of Shakyamuni, the canonic words of Shakyamuni, are in the sutras, and the Lotus Sutra is all the 60,000, 64,000, etc. characters of the Lotus Sutra are contained in its title. Nietzsche writes about it. So the Lotus Sutra is at the center, and the same scene is depicted on every mandala of any school. You have the mandala, you have Shakyamuni and Tao in their correct position facing the audience. You have the bodhisattvas of the essential teaching. I don't need to tell you this, because I'm confident that everybody who is listening knows at least a little bit about what it is inscribed of the mandalas, and also there are plenty of books and website that you can check. Of course, there are identitarian differences. You see on the left the mandala of Benbo Nisho, so he is his first and chief disciple Nisho. I think that the missing Fudo and Eisen were cut off later when the mandala was framed. So you can see two things. One thing, you can see his personality. You can see that Nisho was very, how can I say, a very structured person. You can see it how he places the figures on the mandala. And let me say once again, there are no traces, there are no tracing lines. This is just, you know, you do it while you are doing it. So you can see there are no long comeo lines. There's no dynamic. This is there's a very orderly depiction of the scene, as if everybody will be standing straight like in a squadron. And then you can see that at the bottom he does not sign the mandala as Nichiren, or place Nichiren Shonin or Nichiren Dai Shonin and at most of the early mandalas, but he places Nichiren already in the past inside participating in the assembly of the year, but he asserts his leadership in a way, something that perhaps for him was very natural to sign the mandala in his own name. Then at the center, you see another mandala, which is from Hokibo Nikko, and you see a different expression. You see more dynamism, you see more nervousness in a certain way, because the calligraphy of Nikko is more dynamic and vibrating. And also a very important point is that he plays, except the first one or two mandalas where he places Namu, Nichiren Shonin or Dai Shonin at the center, at the bottom of the center description. He changes this probably after he left Minobu, and then he always places Nichiren, the senior, he signs as Nichiren and places a little inscription, Zaigohan, which means in representation of. This is something that, when a secretary writes a letter for his boss or supervisor, he or she writes the text, and then he signs it by orders, by suggestion of her or his boss. So Nico was basically placing Nichiren always in the present, inscribing the mandala eternally, or continuously, for through his disciple who represented him. And this is a typical trait of the Fuji school, which you can see through the different how can I say, groups, be it Nichiren Shu, Nichiren Honshu, the 8 Fuji temples, all belong to, many of them belong to different denominations, but there is this common point which was initiated by Nico. So inscribing the mandala, of course, with your own calligraphy, without trying to mimic Nichiren's calligraphy. Otherwise, it would be just a calligraphic replica. This is something completely different. And Nico also places many of his inscriptions. Then on the right side, you can see a beautiful mandala of Higobo Nichizo. He was also a direct disciple of Nichiren. He studied with Nichimoku and other young boys under Nichiren at Minobu. So he knew him for a long time. It is known that Nichizo was the half brother probably of Nichiro, and he arrived at the age of 7 maybe, and so he stayed with Nichiren really a long time. And it is said that Nichiren called him at his deathbed, encouraging him to spread his teaching in Kyoto, which he actually did. So Nichizo was, of course, already, we understand it immediately. He was a visual and creative person, and he actually commissioned some skilled artisan in Kyoto, most probably, to make some drawings. You see, there's a lotus dice at the base, there's a lotus at the top. The four heavenly kings are depicted and not inscribed. We can see also identitarian identity, where because he places Nichiren Shonin and Nichiro Shonin, so it is already in a sense of a lineage. In other mandalas, he places the six elder disciples, the Rokuroso, all on the mandala. So he acknowledges the six elderly. And then also he has a very particular trait. If you look at the daimoku in this mandala, you can see that the komyo lines are protruding upwards, and this is not a unique case. It's actually a very particular trait of Nichizo, and which was also continued by many in his school. It's called the Nami Yuri Daimoko. So Nami Yuri means basically the wavering wave or the vibrating wave. So he also, if you see mandalas or inscriptions outside the temples, engraved in stone, which has this nami yuri, upwards leaning daimoku line, you immediately know that this is a temple which belongs to the Nichizos, or part of the Shijo faction. You know that immediately. So the mandala is a perfect matrix which enables all successors, even to the present day, to express their personalities. And as we will see in the third installment, also their particular view of the Lotus, or interpretations of the Lotus Sutra, but always with the Lotus Sutra at the center. So you can see a lot of ideas. So the biggest identity is, of course, that uh, everyone in every Nichiren school uses the mandala. Uh, Statues arrived later for obvious practical reason, but in the early centuries, until recently, the mandala has always been, and even now, it is still central to the Nichiren belief. So apart from all those differences, the Daimoku, so the title of the Lotus Sutra, is always at the center, and the scene is always the same. Just the angle might be different. This is the only difference. And this concludes my presentation for today. And then if you have any questions or curiosity or whatever, I will be very happy to reply to the extent that I can.
Uh, thank you so much, Luigi. Really appreciate this talk and all the talks, of course. But that was very interesting. um, yeah, so now would be a good time for people to ask any questions. You can raise your hand or put it in the chat. I don't see anything quite yet. Well, we're waiting to see if anyone has any pictures. I was wondering about a couple things. Um, One is I know we talked a little bit about Eisen and Fudo, in your last presentation, but I've often wondered if they have kind of the function of the Neo, the two guardians outside of all the temple grounds. Do you think that might be the case, or are they just totally different than the Neo?
Oh, well, they have definitely a protective function. This is out of discussion. So you can fairly compare them to the Neo outside of the temple. Also because the iconology is very similar. I mean, sometimes I have, if you don't look closely at what kind of diadems or accessories do they have? They're very difficult to distinguish. I mean, they are both wrathful deities. They are very plastic. So yeah, we can fairly say that this is the very similar function.
I wondered about that. Um, Another thing I was wondering is oftentimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the Buddha's in the West, right, where the sun sets and the idea of the afterlife. And I'm just very struck by the orientation of the mandala that the viewer is, in a sense, looking to the stupa, which is, from the viewer's point of view, in the east. Or am I getting that confused?
No, stupa is traditionally on facing the east. This is definitely so. So the west is the western paradise of Amitabha. So the Eagle Peak is of course on the east. This is correct.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you. Let's see. I think we have something in the chat. Oh, yeah, Doug was just saying thank you so much. That was
Yeah,
wonderful.
thanks.
Uh, do we have any comments or questions from anyone? Um, I was also very struck by how the mandala was created as part of a team effort. That it wasn't just Nichiren alone in a room. That it was this collective performance. That was very that was kind of eye opening there. Um, it also made me think that not just a performance, but like a ceremonial act. That the inscription of the mandala was probably preceded by like the chanting of daimoku and sutra passages. I know that at Mount Minobu, when we copied sutras, we wore like a little mask or put a little paper in our mouths. So it was like this. Like you said, Nichiren was not just an artist, but was performing this as a ceremony, as a sacred act. And it was just interesting to see that that was one that was collective and not just singular.
Yeah, thank you very much for clarifying the right term because I knew that in the word performance there was something missing, but definitely a ritual or votive act will be is much more appropriate. Of course, this was a religious ritual, not an artistic performance in that way. But we can also say that the mandala is a collective performance even before becoming a paper, because Nakao Takashi wrote that in his view, because they produced the paper by themselves with fibers of the mulberry trees, because it is known to be very resistant, as we have proved today. And so they prepared the paper by themselves. In the washi, the Japanese paper. So of course, there are cases which we know that some believer arrived already with a sheet, one or more sheets of paper, and they some more high grade paper, because Nakao Takashi, he's actually a specialist of the paper specialist. So he always says that one way to certify some new discovery, recent discovery, is not only in the calligraphy but also in the paper, because you can see if you can fairly guess if to which century a paper was produced. Of course, this doesn't mean that I can have an old blank paper of the Kamakura period and then write something on it 100 years after. Of course, but this is combined with the calligraphy. So this is a collective act since the beginning, because you had to fell the trees. You had to produce the bark and the fiber, the papier. You had to produce the paper. You have to paste it together. There must have been someone who was an able artisan to do this. So, and then of course also the ink is, it's not that you go to the drugstore and please give me a jar of ink. They produce this ink with the soot of burnt pines and and some other from the glue coming from fish bones, and many other vegetables they did. So it was definitely from the very beginning something that they did collectively.
Mm, mm. I have two questions here. The first one is it says, "Hello, everyone. How many mandalas did Nichiren make? And if we were strict, the first mandala would be venerated. What did Nichiren write?" I think he meant what was the first one that was the first mandala.
Well, the first that we know of is the one that I show I showed in the last time. It was the one which is dated, and we exactly know where it was, when and where it was inscribed. Um, but we also know that this is a different mandala from the structure that we have now. I know that there has been much debate of this Sado Shikendai mandala, uh, because, as I mentioned before, it is not extant anymore. So there are two schools of thought. So there is Professor Hoko Kuana Hoko from Minobu-san University, who is absolutely certain that this is that scroll that disappeared was an original Nichiren mandala. Because of the textual source, because it basically reflects the Kanjin Honzon Sho and the Kaimuku Sho. But there is another researcher, Kawasaki Hiroshi. He argues that this is not possible because, of course, post facto you can inscribe whatever you want. So I think this debate could be continue forever, and there is no way to know.
Oh,
So I went to a Hokke Commons lecture of Hiroshi Kawasaki last week, I think, and of course, as a foreigner, I always stand out. So I was given a microphone because there was this debate, and the people, the moderator, told, okay, so what do you think? And I, not to escape the debate, but to give another lecture, because also the Homon Kaidan Daimandara, the so-called Daigo Honzon, was mentioned in Kawasaki's lecture. So basically, in my view, and this is sincerely what I think, is, you know, in iconology, the icon is important. So, for example, if we have the same depiction of the same scene of the Annunciation or of the Crucifixion by different artists, of course it's different, but it's an icon. People who believe in that faith, they pray and meditate and give all their positive thoughts to through this depiction. And I have never heard anyone who argued in the Western situation about something being truthful or not. It's what is truthful is the scene that is depicted, is the message. So in a way, even this Homon Kaidan Daimandala, we of course we have abundant proof that this is a later artifact, as for example the Moko Taiji mandala, so the mandala of repelling the Mongols, which was produced in the 17th or 18th century and was revived in the 19th century when the black ships, the Americans, Commodore Perry, arrived to Japan,
mm,
uh, ending uh, the feudal period. But then in that period, this phase, this chanting session towards this wondrous mandala became extremely popular, and this mandala was shown, and it is called the kaicho, so it's a base of business trip for relics in a way. It was shown at many locations in Kyoto. Actually, two of those mandalas, they were shown in that Saikyoji in Kyoto, they were shown in Minobu, they were taken in many other places. And so also this Sado Shikendai mandala, it was brought to Sado and also to other locations in downtown Kyoto, so they could people could see it. So they had this situation where they could pray collectively, and the Nichiren Sangha grow exponentially also in this period. So in from this perspective, it doesn't really matter
Right.
if the icon is what it claims to be, because it is what it claims to be.
Right.
Maybe,
In relation,
maybe not in that sense.
yeah. Now, in relation to the original question, I believe there's like what 128 mandalas in the Gohonzon Shu, or more. Like these are the ones that still
132.
exist that he created,
Yeah.
and he may have created many more, but those are the only ones we still have. Um, and also, my understanding in Nichiren Shu is that we use the so-called Shute mandala, because it's felt like that's the one that best represents what Nichiren was striving for in his later years as far as creating symmetry. And that, if I remember right, isn't that the one that he had enshrined at his deathbed at
Yes,
Ikegami?
exactly, exactly. The the question of a Shute mandala, which you know what it means, is the the one that is decided to represent. This is something that, of course, was I mean, strictly speaking, we don't have a writing where Nichiren puts on paper, this is the one.
Right.
There's no place. So whatever you decide later, as a group, of course, with authority, with much authoritative thought, and I think this is a very significant, is a historically a significant mandala, is it is visually a significant mandala, is a large mandala, giving for a sangha, giving to his one of his closest disciple, who was basically, we can say, his foster son in a way. So it is definitely a very important mandala. But from here to say this is the one, I'm not the person in the position to say this. You, as a priest within a clerical, as a minister within a certain, within the reality of Nichiren Shu, of course, you need to say that. But if we speak broadly to, let's say, to
Yeah.
anyone, I cannot be
Right.
affirming this. If you ask me personally, which one I like, and watch me making the quotation marks in the air, it is actually the one that I show in the slide, that one that was given to Jakunichibo, but not because of a particular reason, because in according to the parameters that I gave in my research, it is the one who most expresses Nichiren's vitality and allow me to say artistic expression in a period where he was at the peak of his predication, and so to speak, at the top. He and his sangha were at the top, but this does not mean that it has a special, how can I say, religious significance in the way of the Shute mandala. It is definitely a very
Yeah.
beautiful mandala, but I think there are many others are also expressing Nichiren's vitality. And
Right.
as you mentioned, like in the Gohonzon Shu, there are 132 actually, and oh, I'm sorry, you are right, 128. But there are actually a few more around, which are, of course, in at some temples of groups which does not allow those to be photographed.
Information.
So if we cannot photograph it and show it on an academic, on a public paper, if we cannot publish it, it's basically same as it doesn't exist.
Right.
No, we
Yeah.
have to find some literal,
Right.
merry-go-rounds to say that they exist, but that we don't know that, etc., etc. But this is the real. So this is what, because of my count of 140, and then of course we have the list of Nico's disciple who received the mandala. So the count, the oldest count goes to probably 200.
Right. Wow. 200. Okay. And of course, in Nichiren we accept other kinds of mandalas, but that's kind of one that has been set aside as one that we particularly would bestow. But that's not to mean that we don't use others. Do you have time for three more questions? And I also want to see. I think Dr. Stone was trying to say something, but I'm not sure. Um, did you have something? Okay, maybe not. Let's give it a moment. All right. So you have time for three more questions?
Sure.
Okay.
The
So
night is still young.
excellent. I know it's really late for you, so I appreciate it. Um, Ken Burchell asks, Mr. Funukiaro, are you familiar with the Gohonzon enshrined in the Kofubo at Taisekiji? The original has been transferred to a wooden Gohonzon, but is said to be a transmission Gohonzon to Nichimoku Shonin, I believe. I ask because it always struck me as something rather amazing. For one thing, it is very large. I apologize that I cannot recall the Japanese name for this Gohonzon.
Yeah, it is the Zazo Honzon. It is actually, yeah, it is, as a matter of fact, is a large mandala which has been, we don't know the size, but there is a photo in the Nico Shonin Gohonzon Shu. It is also a large book because Nico produced over 220 something mandalas. Of course, not all, unfortunately, are photographed. More than half of the in the collection are just how can I say, calligraphic reproductions, or how can I say, diagrams. But definitely, there is a photo of this mandala, and yes, this mandala symbolizes the transmission within this Taizekiji line, so to speak. Um, Not of the entire teaching, as in some readings. Those lineages was within the temple. So yeah, there is this large Gohonzon is extant, and it was transferred. It was carved on wood in the Edo period. Don't ask me in which century, but anyway, in this quite long period,
After
which is,
1600, then.
yes, exactly. And I have no idea when it is shown, because that access Taizikiji is not easy, and as a foreigner, I always stand out.
Hmm. Okay, thank you. Next question. I'd like from Lucas Santos. I'd like to know whether Nichiren's disciples would also write Gohonzon mandalas during his lifetime, or only after his passing would they start writing them.
Not that we know. In Anyway, from the extant mandalas inscribed by his disciple, uh, all of them are dated after his passing. Actually, a few years after his passing, maybe 3 or 7. Maybe there's this sort of a mourning period when they started to inscribe the mandala, but definitely. There's no indication that this happened during his lifetime.
Thank you. And final question from Ernesto Borges Torres. Question regarding Nichiren's Dai Honzon. I understand that this Mandala Gohonzon, the original paper version, is special, but not Honmon Shoshu's claims that are similar to Nichiren Shoshu's claims for their plank Mandala Gohonzon at Taisekiji. I tend to see it as a commemoration of the fulfillment of Nichiren's fulfilled prophecy of the Mongol invasion as per the Kanjin Hanzon show. What is your view of this particular? I think he's talking about the Ita mandala.
Yeah. I mean, there's many Ita mandala. I think if you mention Homon Shoshu, this is a very small group. Was head temple is somewhere outside Yokohama, and actually, the this plank mandala is a relatively recent production, I believe, maybe 19th century, not much older. So the significance of this mandala, as I said, this is the one that I mentioned before. Unfortunately, the picture was very small, and I couldn't enlarge it with my touchscreen. But particular message of this mandala is where Nichiren writes. Let me quote from my books if I can find it, so I can read the.
Mm.
It is the number 16 of the catalog, and Nichiren writes on it. Following the greatly awakened world honored one's entry into extinction, more than 2,220 years have passed. Even so, within the countries of UAZ, China, and Japan, this Daihonzon had yet to exist. Either it is not known but not propagated, or it is not known at all. I, the compassionate Father, exercising the Buddha's wisdom, hide and leave this for the future age of the generation. At that time, during the latter 500 years, Bodhisattva Jogyo makes his appearance in the world and for the first time widely propagates this. So this inscription is unique, as we see, also because I forgot to mention before that it is the first and only one where he mentioned a Dai Honzen, not a Dai Mandala. So in this way, it has a very deep significance. This is a
Mm.
bigger picture. I'm sorry, I'm not good in the left and the right. So this mandala is significant because of this special inscription. He evidently identifies himself with Bodhisattva Jogyo, and it is also for the reason that I explained before, because he mentioned UAZ, so the Kushan Empire, where so implicitly he states that the Lotus Sutra comes from this place and not from India.
Mm. Mm.
So in this sense, this mandala is very important. But if you, I'm not sure if there's a reading about the Mongols, and of course it was the Mongols had yet to attack, or were attacking, or just attacked for the first time, the Bunei no Yaku, the Bunei battle. But I have some difficulties in putting some additional reading into it.
Mm. Nice. And of course, when Nichiren says Honzon, Dai Honzon, I think many Americans think he's just talking about mandalas. But this term Honzon means focus of devotion, that is a generic Japanese term for whatever is most respected or revered. So the mandala is, in a sense, a way to depict the Honzon. Is this correct?
Exactly, and I thank you very much, you guys, for hinting at this definition, because uh, I think most of you remember when it is generally still called the object of devotion or the object of veneration, but object in the sense, not in the sense of like this glass object, like in object and subject. You are the object of my thoughts. You are the object of my love, in this sense, object and subject. But because it's very easy to misunderstanding in the sense of a physical object, I think the focus of devotion, even if it's a little bit turning, rounding rounding about the term, but is maybe a very interesting way to define it. And as you say, rightfully, so the Honzon could be, so if the Honzon at St. Paul Cathedral is the crucifix, for example. The Honzon at Todaiji is the Virushana Buddha. So the Honzon is this focus of devotion. So in this sense, defining the mandala, which is an object, as the Honzon, he is implying that the focus of devotion should be the mandala. In this way, this is a correct reading,
Mhm. Right.
in my humble view.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Um, well, I think that's we've gone way over time, which I'm glad you were able to stay up and answer all these questions.
Yeah, once you are out,
um, well, I think that will be it for today then. And I want to thank you for your presentation and for staying and answering questions. I want to thank all the attendees for being here and for your great questions. And we really look forward to the third installment, which I believe will be on the 19th, correct?
yes, on the 19th.
Right. So that will be on the on a Sunday, and it will be happening
Yes.
before the usual service and discussion that we hold in our sangha. So usually we
Mhm,
start at 10:30, but
mhm.
your presentation will be from 9 to 10, and it will have the questions and answers, and then we'll go into our service after that. Um, so I look forward to seeing you in, I guess, will be a couple of weeks then.
Yes, it will be. I think you will have the legal time changing, so it will be so 2 o'clock in the morning for me.
Right. Right.
Instead, I mean, it's already.
Yeah, this tonight, well,
Okay.
tomorrow at 2 a.m., it'll fall back to 1 a.m., at least in Pacific time. So, yeah.
Okay. Uh, Thanks a lot to everybody who was participating, especially Dr. Jacqueline Stone, who I know she has a very busy schedule, and who find the time to attend. And well, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And
Okay, take care. I'm
good
gonna
night
start.
for me, and have a nice day to everybody.
Okay.